Hi everybody, thank you so much for being here. I'm Sonia Felton, I'm with Action Annapolis, and our focus has been to bring issues and conversations to the community that just help us become advocates in our district. So thank you for being here. I want to give a big thank you to the Chesapeake chapter of the AIA. For being a partner with us this evening and for recognizing that this is an important topic for their members. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Hammond Wilson Architects for being a sponsor, and plenty of water for the
Yes.
So I'd like to acknowledge the Dynamite team that has put this series together. This is the third in 3. And that is Karen Anderson, Phoebe Duff, and Emily Legum. So thank you for that. Amy Britt is live streaming. If you know anyone who couldn't be here tonight, it's going to be on the Action Annapolis Facebook page, and as well as the prior two. So I'm going to make it very quick. Oh, Phoebe, could you get that basket that's on the table?
I got it.
Very quick pitch. We're all volunteers, and we rely, Lynn has it, we rely exclusively on your donations to cover our costs for events like tonight. So anything that you can provide is going to be greatly appreciated. So our intention with this series has been to give a comprehensive overview in 3 parts. The first session was focusing on history of housing policy, specifically discriminatory housing policy. And we watched a film called Owned, which is available for people to download or rent online, and I really recommend that you watch it. It's pretty revealing. We also saw these policies and how they played out through the vantage point of Carl Snowden, who many of you know. He's a lifelong civil rights activist here in Annapolis and a witness to racist policy and how it played out and it impacted specifically communities of color in Annapolis. The second session, we discussed the challenges that people are facing in actually obtaining housing, whether it's from public housing transitioning to ownership or rental, or homelessness, or trying to do this with a middle-class salary, and what those stories look like. So tonight we have decision makers and policy planners here to speak to us about some of the ideas they have to address this issue. And we also are eager to give the audience an opportunity to interact with those individuals and to ask questions and share some of your experiences, perhaps. So what we hope for from Action Annapolis is that everyone will have a little more insight into what some people whose lives are very different than yours are facing through this crisis. And we also hope that information leads to action. I think all of us have the power to help shape legislation. Our elected officials are very accessible to us, whether you're an architect or a citizen. And we also definitely have the power to support people in communities who are already trying to advocate for themselves and to get behind them and their efforts. So I'd like to introduce our panel moderator. We're going to have 2 panels tonight, and we're going to have a Q&A after each one. And Lawrence will tell you a little bit more about that. But Lawrence Lanahan has worked in radio and print journalism for over a decade, written for Al Jazeera America, Columbia Journalism Review, NPR's Morning Edition, and Color Lines, among other outlets, including 5 years producing for WYPR, Baltimore's NPR station. Lawrence has done in-depth award-winning reporting on racism and housing issues for NPR. The Lines Between Us, a 50-episode radio series for Baltimore's WYPR, won Columbia University's DuPont Award. Lawrence is the author of The Lines Between Us, Two Families, and a Quest to Cross Baltimore's Racial Divide. And he'll be around after the presentation. They'll have books, and I hope the panelists will be able to stay after the formal presentation also. So thank you, Lawrence.
So we have two people on our first panel. First, I'd like to introduce Melissa Maddox Evans. Melissa moved here in October to be the new director of HACA. And then our second panelist is Adriana Foster, and she is here with us from Baltimore. Yeah, that'd be And Adriana is a community activist who's done many, many things, but what is of most interest to you all tonight is that she is involved in the setup of the Charm City Land Trust in Baltimore.
All right, so thanks to, I'm just going to take this off. Let her pass it around, get this out of the way. So thank you all for coming. Thanks to all our panelists for coming. Thank you to Action Annapolis for putting this great series on. I've been to two of these, and to have citizens and elected officials talking about such an important issue all together is pretty inspiring to see. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to say a few words and kind of set up where we're at today in Anne Arundel County, and then we'll give a few minutes to each of our panelists to just introduce themselves and say whatever they want to say to get this going. What I will say in setting things up is HUD, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, they require any jurisdiction that gets money from them to do a report. And it's one of these reports that looks boring to look at and goes on a shelf, but it's tremendously important. It's called the Analysis of Impediments to Fair Housing Choice. And if you want to know what is impeding fair housing in a place, it is the first place you should look. And the last one was in 2012. They're making one right now with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council and all the local governments for the region and all the counties right now. The draft should be coming out early this year. I want to tell you a few things from the 2012 Analysis of Impediments for Anne Arundel County. From 1990 to 2008, home values in the county went up 78%. Incomes went up 12%. Much of the housing built since then has been on the upper end. It is just affordable housing is in a real pinch here. There's not much land zoned for medium or high density or for multifamily like apartments. Not enough apartments with 3 or more bedrooms. Multifamily housing is over-concentrated in heavily minority areas. The cost burden, overcrowding comes down hardest on Black and Hispanic families. Back then, there was a waiting list of 2,400 for 395 public housing units. Another 6,000 people waiting for Section 8 vouchers. Apparently, that whole total is 17,000 now. And a couple weeks ago, Christina Pompa, are you here? You're here. Hi. She told us she works in the Department of Planning and Zoning. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
That's the one thing I'll say tonight that I know is true. She said that in their analysis, 94,000 more people are estimated to come to Anne Arundel County in the next 15 years. That's like this room times. So, you know, we gotta make room for them. Scoot over. And so that's what's at stake and that's what's going on. That's kind of why we're here. You know, I detailed the history of housing policy in Anne Arundel County and the rest of the region in my book, and it's never been especially inclusive of Black families, minority families, or the poor. My question is always who benefits when we're making decisions about what we're going to do with 94,000 new people or whatever it is. So that's kind of where we are and why we're here. as far as I can tell. And so I want to start with you. You work in South Carolina, is that true? Two true things. So now you're here. Third thing is true. What are the challenges that are common to all areas in creating deeply affordable housing, say for folks who make less than 30% of the average or the median income for an area? I mean, it's not like Washington has been lavishing funding on public housing for the last 40 years. So we'll get to Anne Arundel County in a second, but having been in these different places, what is the common thread? What do you see?
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me here tonight to speak with you all. It's an honor to do so and to have this opportunity to have a discussion on these topics, so I'm grateful to be here. Some commonalities with regards to the challenges. Okay, now you can hear me. Okay. So, one of the things that, of course, the first thing housing providers and developers and people in the housing industry focus on, of course, is what? Housing. Like, how can we build housing? How can we build more housing? Access to housing and the resources, to be able to develop for the people in the demographic that we want to serve. But what is consistent across the board is not just finding the housing and placing individuals in housing, but ensuring they have the jobs and the incomes, the consistent income available to them to be able to maintain housing. So, and this starts from all the way throughout the spectrum, from homelessness to anywhere along the spectrum of low-income issues to, possible home ownership. The issue is being able to find a stable income that could match, the housing needs. So that's very consistent across the board. On a more of a policy end, or I would say, I don't like to use the word political end, there's always a challenge in every jurisdiction, although it may be unique according to jurisdictions, is the will and the desire to develop and create policies that generate more housing opportunities. And that, that starts on a legislative level. And so for there to be a great desire, you have to start there, because that's where the challenges start. You can come up with solutions if people have the desire, and the right people have the desire and feel pressured to do so by constituents. So those are some things you're going to find, everywhere, with regards to housing.
Sure. All right, now, what about Anne Arundel County? Has anything struck you as unique about the challenges to affordable housing here? I mean, I'll throw one out there. I don't know what you all rank now. I live in the city, but I don't know what you all rank now, but it's one of the wealthiest counties in the country. So there's one. What else?
I'm not going to speak for the county overall, because I haven't been here long enough to analyze the entire, county. With regards to the city, I think there has to be a connection between the need to develop more housing, the need to preserve the affordable housing that we have, and that desire starts really at the city level, and is not disconnected from any other legislative effort on that level. So just really awakening the jurisdiction's desire to make sure that there are instrumentalities set up to encourage more revenues for affordable housing, and not just programs, but a real dedicated effort to encourage growth in that area, which is hard in a city like Charleston, because we used to get this a lot, that maybe have limited land use and land availability, and you have such a disparity, in land values. In Charleston, we were surrounded on three sides by water, so the question was always, where are you going to build? And, we can always go up, there's always the will. And, developers, have discovered that for luxury housing and for hotels, because those are aplenty, so there's space, but it's just creating that will at the top levels.
And just one more for you real quick. Just as far as public housing here in Annapolis, you kind of walked into a lawsuit, and it's a lot of it was about inspections. I know that the position of the lawsuit is denying a disparate impact on race, but as far as inspections go, the city got a new law passed to make inspections more possible. Is that a fair way to characterize it? There's also the relocation of residents from Newtown 20, and this sort of speaks to the lack of investment in public housing. Living in public housing can be very unstable when it comes to maintenance, when it comes to tearing things down, building them back up again, and where people are going to go. So I just wondered if you could tell us sort of the latest update on relocating people, beefing up inspections, just life in public housing.
Yeah, sure. Well, just for the record, I cannot speak on any pending litigation. So I'm not going to do that. But I will speak generally to the issue of inspections. For those that don't know, housing authorities are subject to a series of inspections. We are subject to inspections by HUD annually, and we are required to perform our own inspections internally. And so inspections are not anything that's foreign to housing authorities. It's something that we have to participate in all the time. If we have tax credit properties that we're managing, we're of course required to, I'm sorry? Oh, okay, you were emotioning. We are required to inspect those properties. So the requirement of a city jurisdiction to inspect housing authorities, from my understanding, is something that most cities and most codes have a provision that the city will inspect properties. So that's not anything unusual or abnormal. What often is the difference is that usually in a locality, the city and the housing authority will decide or come to some sort of agreement as to how it will manage and or if the city will engage in inspections. And so that occurs on the local level. And that's sort of how HUD's cooperation agreement is set up for those issues to be hashed out on the local level. So Annapolis, City of Annapolis wants to inspect our properties, that's fine. And they have been, or are in the process of inspecting properties. One of the things that have to be melded together or married throughout this process is HUD's inspection requirements versus the city's inspection requirements, which can be a bit different. And so there's a bit of an adjustment period that housing authorities have to, or particularly the Annapolis Housing Authority has to adjust to, which takes obviously time in order to do that. But they're going well. Units are being inspected. As items are being pointed out, we're correcting them. And as far as relocation efforts, those are underway. And residents are being transferred to units. And so to other available units, or they're given, for those that are part of the Newtown 20 relocation project, they're given the option to have a voucher also if they want to explore other housing options. And so those processes are underway.
Okay, thank you. I'm realizing that out of habit as a reporter, I just started asking questions right away and rolled over your introduction. Do you want to do that at the end? Do you want to have the last word before we go to questions with the audience? Okay, sorry about that. So, Adriana, for folks who are on the lower income end, looking for housing, let's say less than 30% of the area median income, just what kind of living situations do they find themselves in, however precarious? What are their options? We're going to talk about what ought to happen. What's happening?
Yeah, so, I guess I'll say like a quick note about who I am. I work in Baltimore City and live in Baltimore City. I am a leadership organizer with United Workers, and we're a human rights organization that sees ourselves building a movement to end poverty led by the poor. So I can speak on what I understand as a person who has tried to find quality and affordable housing in Baltimore City, and that's incredibly difficult. The conditions there are that a third of homeowners and half of renters are living in housing that's unaffordable to them. So most people in the city struggle to find housing that is quality, safe, accessible, and affordable. And so as United Workers, we worked with other organizations and built out a coalition called the Fair Development Roundtable starting in 2016, bringing together people who are renters, homeowners, and people with the experience of homelessness together to try to figure out what do we as people experiencing this crisis do to remedy the conditions that we're in. And so ultimately, a lot of our members are renters and they move often. I can think specifically of one of our longtime members who's been with us since probably like 2005. And he's I think he's probably 50 years old and has moved 40 times. So there is incredible instability when you are looking for something that you can actually afford and maintain. That means that a lot of people are living together and trying to put together their incomes, especially because in Baltimore City over the last several decades, there's been a lot of investment in waterfront profit-making development at the cost of our neighborhoods. And so our communities are disinvested in, and what we got out of all of that investment that went into the Inner Harbor and other developments, luxury developments like that, was low-wage service sector jobs. And so you're talking about housing that has continued to increase while people's wages remain stagnant. And so our approach is to really look at how do we address the human right to housing, and what we've done is we put together a campaign called our 2020 Vision Campaign, trying to make sure that the city prioritizes affordable housing with the way it spends its resources, and also implementing a tool called Community Land Trust, because we see it as a way for poor people to build power by actually making decisions about development themselves.
And what do you think, does the public perception of their situations really match what they're going through? What are some misperceptions you feel like are out there about affordable housing?
That is an excellent question. I mean, I think people in the city, community residents, they understand very deeply what sort of crisis and what sort of problems we're dealing with because they live every day in it. You've got a city that has 40,000 vacant properties, but people are experiencing homelessness and living in really precarious housing conditions and moving a lot. And so I think the problem is pretty clear for us, and it has required that people who are impacted are coming together and are unified and relentless in our pursuit to ensure that the city acts with the same urgency that we feel.
Yes.
Thank you. So, what tools do you feel like are opening up to house people who have a lot of housing instability? I'm talking anything from like HUD's rental assistance demonstration program, kind of public-private partnerships for public housing, to community land trusts. Like, what do you see? Where do you see the light in housing people right now?
Yeah. there's a lot of possibilities. I think oftentimes we tend to think of, the affordable housing crisis is just so hard and it's so, difficult, but it's really not. It's just deciding which options you'd like to explore. So an option would be like a community land trust, creating one in which, we did one I was part of creating one in Charleston, and it was really out of the desire, the city's desire and the housing authority's desire, and also the historic Charleston Foundation desire, which is major.
When you say foundation, you mean like people that have money?
Yeah, most of the people that are in that foundation do, but they're the ones that are guardians of all things historic. You have one here too, right? I'm sure. I know you do in Annapolis. So, but we all got together and decided, the historic Charleston Foundation from the perspective of preservation. That's their thing. They love that. But what they wanted to do is, we need to preserve communities that were disappearing. African American communities. We had, sections of towns that, were once majority, African American owned businesses, schools, the whole 9 yards, and that were completely evaporated and now turning into, you got doggy daycare and goat yoga and all kinds of stuff going on in every corner. Just the whole vibe of the, character of the neighborhoods are changing. So from their perspective, preservation is important. From the housing authority's perspective, we're into preserving and ensuring, housing remains affordable in the city. Their desire was to create more housing and to create an entity in which creates ownership amongst the members, and that keeps land in sections of the community affordable in perpetuity. I mean, that's a one solution. There are several solutions of, affordable housing trust funds, that should be created even on the local level, and designating, your local resources, bond referendums. There's so many different avenues. Most of them end in money because you need money to address the problems. But there are lots of solutions, partnerships with educational institutions, healthcare institutions,
hospitals,
corporations.
Right?
Exactly. So one of the things that we would often, in Charleston, MUSC was a major employer. They employed like 80,000 people, something ridiculous. And they own land. So we would go to them and say, are you interested in housing? One of the things they experienced were they had, people that weren't, not doctors but nurses and people that were technical assistants, traveling 2 hours to work, one way. So they realized, the need to house their own workers. So just beginning those kinds of conversations with corporations and local entities to begin being a part of the solution making process, because they're all there. Lots of cities are implementing, great ideas, but again, it starts with, the willpower.
I think this is a good transition to the Community Land Trust and Affordable Housing Trust Funds, because United Workers has gotten a lot of purchase comparatively on the city as far as those things. So can you just give us the short narrative of like what you all have done to get an affordable housing trust fund in Baltimore? Maybe a short definition of what a community land trust is, and what's going on with community land trusts in Baltimore, especially as regards the trust fund.
Yes, I'll try to be very brief in telling a years-long story. So Community Land Trust is a nonprofit that holds land in trust. It treats land as a public good. And so typically land trusts are made up of the people who live where the land is. If there's a house that's a land trust house, the people who are making decisions are the people who live in that house, the people who live around that house, and any stakeholders that are going to lend their skills to the mission of the people on the board. And so our land trust movement in Baltimore has grown significantly over the last several years, but I'll leave that to the side for a second. So back in 2016, when we launched our 2020 Vision campaign, it was a policy ask, $20 million every year for permanently affordable housing and another $20 million to deconstruct vacant property, rehab that property, and to provide living wage jobs for community residents maintaining land in their neighborhoods. And so a part of a multi-part campaign was to have a fund within the city that would prioritize that and where that money could go. And so what we did in 2016 was we aligned with other organizations in Baltimore City to do a ballot initiative, and we wanted to amend the city's charter so that we could have a trust fund. And in about 6 weeks of doing a lot of walking and talking and holding clipboards, we were able to gather enough signatures to get that question on the ballot, and then it passed overwhelmingly with 83% of the vote. And so that's the first part. So it passed in 2016, and then what happened after that was that although our mayor at the time expressed incredible support while she was on the campaign trail, when it came time to actually put money in the fund, it was silence. And so we engaged more and more residents, gathered more signatures, got postcards signed, had meetings with city council, met regularly, did what we do, which is political education and leadership development to ensure that we could continue to push. And what ended up happening in 2018 was that we essentially launched another ballot initiative to put money in the fund. We wanted to introduce legislation, which our council champion did that to make sure that we had a funding mechanism every year, and it stalled. And so we said, well, if you as our elected officials won't get this done, we'll go back to the people and get it done. And it went up until right before when we had, I think it was maybe like a week before the signatures had to be turned in, and we told them we have them, so we're gonna do it. They were like, oh wait, we're ready to talk now. So in lots of conversations, we now have a trust fund that will see millions of dollars every year.
Yes.
We have been working with, well, I guess we're working with the DHCD, our housing department now, but it was a lot of back and forth, a lot of very tense conversations. Because then once we had the mechanism to get it funded, we wanted to make sure that it prioritized permanently affordable housing every year. And so, long story short, I'm sorry, as of 2 days ago, there will be a significant, I think about 40% of the trust fund for the next 3 years and beyond will be dedicated to community land trusts and shared equity model housing.
I wrote a book about this stuff, and that's like tucked in the end of my book because it was just happening. I'm stunned to see 40%. I mean, was that stunning to you?
Absolutely. It was a fight.
Yeah.
And none of that happened because it was a good idea. It happened because our members.
So real quick, let me give each of you a couple minutes, and we'll go to for whatever, and we'll go to the audience.
Okay, just one quick thing about CLTs. It does require local investment. So the city of Charleston invested $10 million in the CLT because it was very serious about it being successful. So that really shows commitment. And it is an awesome model because even if they're homeowners within the CLT, they're allowed to resale at a limited, they can gain some equity out of the home, but the home still remains in an affordable housing range for the next buyer. So it's just permanently affordable. And the same goes for rental units. So it's just a great model.
Anything else you want to share for a minute before we go
1
to
minute.
Adriana for the last minute? We got a couple minutes for you guys. Because I stepped on you earlier, so I want to open it up to you to share anything else.
Okay, well, hello. Again, I think one of the important things, one thing I did want to mention, you mentioned something earlier about what's something maybe Anne Arundel County or for me it'd be the city of Annapolis to think about with regards to affordable housing is that what needs to happen here, in my perspective, is that the burden of solving or dealing with affordable housing cannot lie solely on a housing authority.
Yay.
Housing authority is an administrator of affordable housing services or programs, but the burden should not fall. And I feel like here that has been the case. And so when something like that happens, it's like, well, how do I deal with all that affordable housing stuff? And we won't worry about it because they'll do it. And there's a disassociation that occurs that prevents creativity and growth, and also accountability, because affordable housing is everybody's problem.
Yes.
And the face of affordable housing is pretty much everyone. It's not who, some people think need affordable housing, based on race or socioeconomic background. Because, most people you talk to, they don't realize that they're in an affordable housing range, based on the salaries that they make and the rents that they're paying. And I tell them, I'm like, you probably come down and apply for housing if you're like, they don't realize they may consider themselves middle class or, in some other kind of bracket, but technically if you look at the numbers, you need affordable housing assistance. So we're a lot, there's much greater need that requires a broad spectrum of partners from the governmental level, corporate, nonprofit, and housing authority. And that's how we'll come up with all the great solutions, to solve it, because, it can't rest solely. So that's one thing I wanted to say.
You got a minute. I'm gonna get you guys some water. You got some.
Oh, thank you. What should I say? I'm not sure. I guess the only thing I would add is that we are specifically interested in community land trust because we believe that housing is a human right. And we're trying to pursue non-speculative housing because as long as housing is treated as a commodity, something to be bought and sold, and not something you should have because you're a human being and you need it, that means that people will remain unhoused. So I applaud all of you being in the room tonight, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with you all as we're moving forward to making sure that people are safely housed in Maryland.
I bet some of you have questions. We have a little time, so you got here first.
Yeah. You wanna you wanna come up? Let's put a mic. Let's put a mic here and have people line up. Is that all right? Let's just do that, and then everybody can hear you. And just go ahead and line up here if you want to ask a question. And I'm gonna let you guys answer.
Good evening. My name is Jeffrey Henderson, and I live in this community. As a matter of fact, I live across the street from the development on Clay Street. And I'm glad to hear that you've taken ownership for assisting with the management of that new development, because they need help. I am seriously concerned about giving Penrose the Newtown 20 project, because they're not doing a very good job of managing this development across the street. All of these mothers with children, and they have the area where the dumpster is up on the top of the hill, where the lights are out. And if God forbid, one of these mothers were to be sexually assaulted, or a child, because they failed for the last 6 months to light that area. Affordable housing is a euphemism. So I'd like to give more detail on what that elephant in the room is. To some people in this room, affordable housing does not include those who are disenfranchised, unemployed, unskilled. And we hear this conversation over and over again. Affordable housing, but those people are not included. Thank you.
So thank you for your comments, and I meet with Penrose weekly, and sometimes we talk every other day to make
Because
sure
there's
the
a
property.
serious concern for those people at Newtown 20.
Yeah.
And,
Oh yeah.
And Columbia is a classic example of why you don't want to be expanding people who are unskilled into decent
Exactly.
neighborhoods.
So I definitely hear you on that. I appreciate your comment.
I'm an architect practicing in Annapolis. Early in my career as affordable housing was a passion of mine. I was in Savannah at the time. Did some work up in Charleston as well. But one of the issues that I'm seeing with affordable housing is how we balance the life safety issues, the modern building code issues, with being able to provide quality, affordable housing, especially out of the private sector. So I worked with a developer for about 2 years who was trying to find buildings that had fallen into a substandard state to upgrade them, basically bringing safety up, bringing energy efficiency up, and those kinds of things that are low-hanging fruit. But as soon as you start touching them, you begin to get into things like fire suppression, completely rewiring, sometimes creating fire barriers where fire barriers were never built into those buildings. The building codes have changed. And basically, by the time we got done with an abandoned apartment building, almost a building should have been abandoned, a building was abandoned up in Baltimore, and he pulled out of every single one of those because there was no way to make them economically viable with his dedicated purpose of providing affordable housing in those cases. In each case, we would have ended up with collectively maybe 100 units of price-targeted housing, but the cost to do it was too much. Dealing with the Building Code Authority in Baltimore was almost impossible. They will not work in the city of Annapolis. I understand this is a difficult problem. You don't want to put people into housing that's dangerous just because they're below income.
Right.
By the same token, the cost of trying to bring some of these 1950s and 60s era buildings up to a safety level that's modern, you could tear them down, build a new building, but then you couldn't afford to put people into them.
Right.
So that's got to be part of the dialogue. It's not just zoning. It's not just not in my neighborhood. It's also how do we do this in a way that's sensible, that we make them safer, but we don't necessarily make them unaffordable. That's my comments.
Thank you. So you're right, and HUD agrees with you. In 2012, it created through legislation, well, Congress did, and HUD enacted the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program to be able to allow housing authorities to revitalize its properties in a way that has been challenging through prior legislative efforts. You know, before there was Hope 6, there was, several other iterations of, efforts that some were successful, some not. But the difficulty with particularly housing authorities is that every single building is owned in partnership with HUD through a declaration of trust. And so we can't leverage our properties, we can't use the equity, we just manage. And then have to manage it according to whatever subsidies we receive, which do not meet the need.
But this is
And
this
so
is the private sector that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, so but from our perspective, it's really the same issue. So housing authorities are encouraged to enter into the RAD program, convert its housing portfolio in order for it to be updated, but it has to do that through public and private partnerships. And so that's the avenue that HUD is pushing housing authorities to do. So these are very interesting times because I don't know what people were thinking, but how buildings were constructed according to what was standard back then 50 years ago or 60 years ago. Its standards are different, but it's definitely an issue that many cities are facing just across the country, not just here.
Yeah, I want to do some audience question management because this is a good thing. We have a lot of questions. We got 9 minutes. And I've seen this thing lately where they say they take 3 questions and let the panel kind of deal with them all. Is that all right for everybody in line? I don't want to leave anybody out. Can we do like 3 people, make a very brief comment or question, and we'll all try to answer?
Do you have a note taker to get the?
I'll put it on my phone.
Okay.
All right, so go ahead.
My name is Heidi. I've lived in DC, New York, and now Annapolis. Something that I have seen is affordable units for rent are not necessarily affordable. They may be in a luxury building. $1,300 for somebody that's making less than $50,000 a year is not affordable, even if it is a luxury building. And a tiny unit at that, right? It's intended for one person. Housing projects are also not necessarily been the best service provided to people that are not able to afford their own housing. I'm not that familiar with public land trusts, but how does that kind of serve the community to be integrated
and not keep people that are not able to provide or afford their own housing diverse, different, just not just kind of what's come to be our public housing projects, which people really struggle with safety, violence, drug use, alcohol use, and just makes it a lot less safe.
Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Maddox Evans. You inherited a lot of properties, and they're all pretty old, I think. And I think there's probably a timeline for each of the properties. I want to ask you specifically about Robinwood. So Robinwood, I think, was built in the late 60s, maybe early 70s. And at least as of 2008 or so, they were planning on rebuilding it. They're saying that it's kind of reached its useful life. After, and I know there is a pending lawsuit. You are aware of that. After the city started doing inspections this summer, they started relicensing, and one of the licensing criteria that they waived for the Robinwood properties, which is approximately, I think, about 200 different units, was the fire requirements for hardwired smoke detectors. And they said that was okay for the next 5 years or until the property was redeveloped. So I was wondering if that's okay for the city to license that way. Do you think, are we close to redevelopment of Robinwood? And is that all okay?
I'll clarify that distinction for you. And so there was a certain requirement with regards to hardwiring that the city was requiring. They said instead what was equally acceptable was for us to use another type of smoke detector that required a lithium battery. And so we converted all of the smoke detectors to those. So that's why it was in compliance. So it's not that it wasn't up to their code or established units that would be subject to revitalization at some point. They said that that alternative was also acceptable. And so we did not see it as any type of means to get around the requirement. And all of our smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, are HUD approved. And so HUD has approved all of our fixtures in the unit with regards to, those types of things. And so we don't have any safety concerns as far as that's concerned. As far as scheduling, that will be at some point down the line. We're working on Newtown 20, then Blum is slated to be next. In the next phase will be Robinwood, and so I can't say exactly the timing on all that. This is a great opportunity though, if you have ideas with regards to redevelopment of the property, we would love to hear them. So if you can forward that to us, any ideas, because this is a great opportunity to sort of re-envision the community. So we would love that information now, because we can begin that in the pre-planning stages.
So let's get your question and we'll throw it together with the first one, okay?
My name is Carolyn. I live in the city, and until recently I rented for almost 20 years of my life, and it has always been a big expense. And in the city here, we, just in the last few years, before you didn't really notice them, and now it's every third house or long-term renters, and a lot of places have put caps on it to kind of try to even the market. And I'll take my answer at the end because I know there's time to space.
So we've got a comment there about affordable units not being actually that affordable, and then these sort of short-term rentals driving things up.
Public trust versus
public
choice of housing.
Okay. And let's bring one more in. Why not?
I just wanted to ask a question. I wanted to know if you could explain public housing and who is responsible for what. Some of it's federal, some of it's city. Who is responsible for the upkeep, for the funding, for the everything of that?
Yeah,
I think that would be good for
There's also been a general question going around, like what's the difference between public housing and affordable housing? So do you guys want to deal with that and maybe talk a little bit about your question about public housing and being sort of integrated with the community? Is that a fair way to describe your question?
public land trust versus
Oh.
a public trust.
Okay, let's do it like that 101 real quick.
Okay.
Yeah. So, let's see how we answer the question. Sorry, I was listening to everyone and now it's all swirled up. I did want to say to your point, we have tried to think about a lot of different tools that need to come together, and one is land banking. Over the last several decades in Baltimore, profit-making developments have been able to access public money, tax breaks, TIFs, pilots, cheap land. And so the city owns a lot of properties, and so being able to get that in the hands of community, that land cheaply to be developed, also helps with affordability, and also it's subsidy. That's why we created the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because we know resources have to go into these projects to make them deeply affordable. And to your question about affordability, for us, we designed our trust fund to be, half of it has to go to 50% of the area median income and below, and the other half has to go to 30% of the area median income and below, which was our target because the city didn't have a plan to house people at 30% of the area median income and below. And so we're talking about housing for people with low income to no income. And to your point about community land trusts and how those folks are being integrated into a larger landscape that has investment. Land trusts are developed because community residents come together and decide they want to have deeply affordable, permanently affordable housing in their community. And the tool can be used to, well, it's used in a lot of different ways, but we see it as a way to do development without displacement. So you're able to maintain housing affordability while investment comes into the community. So it's a anti-gentrification tool, but it's also a tool where communities that have been disinvested in are able to acquire property and do what needs to be done. And so it's also situated in a larger framework for us called fair development. All that means is development that's driven by our human rights principles. And so we're working on workers' rights and zero waste and trying to make sure that our communities are healthy and safe and sustainable and deeply affordable housing and everything in between. And because we feel that all of those things have to happen so that our people are healthy and safe and live in communities where they can thrive.
Let's get these two real quick. Is that all right? Just squeeze these two questions in and see what we can do with them.
Sure, this is really behind my I just wanted to clarify really quickly, because I'm sure you didn't mean to imply that the HUD inspections are meant to replace local jurisdiction inspections.
No, I
they only do 20%
Yeah, we do.
of the properties.
HUD does
right?
perform inspections of our properties.
Right.
I was listing them as the
Right.
type of inspections that we undergo.
Yep, just 20% of them though. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, but also I wanted to say, I'm with Legal Aid here in Annapolis. We've been here forever, and we are heavily invested in the safety and security of the residents in all of Annapolis, but particularly in public housing, because those are the most vulnerable residents in the city, and they don't have a second option, as you know, in this city. This is the housing of last resort for those folks. And so we really believe that a healthy, functioning housing authority is a resource for the city, and it's necessary for the city. And I really keyed in on something that you said earlier, and that was that you need investment. You need investment from the city, you need investment from the county, and you need investment from the state, and then of course the federal resources. And so my question, really believe it or not, this does lead up to a question, and that is kind of a two-part. One, and that is, do you see the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis receiving that investment and that attention that you need from the other governmental agencies and private agencies, advocacy groups that you could perhaps get funding through? Do you see that happening, number one? And number two, what can we as advocates for your residents do to help the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis to get the city's attention, get the county's been particularly responsive, but we haven't seen that from the city thus far, and the state. And how can we help you?
Thank you. And let's get the second question and just make sure we get it, and then we'll get We'll get some answers. Okay. Hi. Thank you.
Hey, your book is amazing. Thank you so much. It's really
I didn't
cool.
plant that. So thank you.
It's cool to see you here in person and just to see another example of another way to be white. I wanted to pose like something.
Fair way to put it.
Wait, no, stop talking, or else you're gonna lose that. Something that you mentioned earlier was our like preconceived notions about folks that are in public housing or subsidized housing or who is, you know, in affordable housing. As someone who is overserved, an overserved community member, one of the things that opened my eyes was hearing from my colleague who lives in Newtown 20 and pays $1,200 in rent. $1,200 in rent, and her ceiling is caving in with mold. And I said, well, I paid $1,400 in rent just a couple of blocks from you. But she isn't able to get into that because her applications aren't accepted. So it's a lot more complex than, well, it's actually quite simple in my opinion. But it's a lot more to it than just poverty or being underserved or whatever. So one of the things that I'm encouraging folks to do who are overserved is to really lift up whatever these folks are, they're in these positions, what they're already doing to advocate for themselves. One of it was just putting up the posters and signs in your yards that they have to show that this isn't just about, you know, poverty or this demographic or whatever, to amplify and give you that political, you know, push that allows you to do your job even more.
Right.
My question was, what else can overserved populations do to help put that pressure on?
Thank you. Similar questions. No, I mean, what? There's the
I have
housing
a lot of
authority.
signs here if anybody wants some signs.
I mean, there's the housing authority, and then there's the rest of us, right? And some of us have more privilege and power and wealth and influence than others. So what does that look like, I guess, maybe for the community and the housing authority to work together? Is that okay to put those together like that?
Okay, what is public housing? Real quickly, public housing is housing that is subsidized by the federal government. It is owned by housing authorities. The creation of public housing is through local statute, state law statute, and also city statutes. And so public housing is legally owned by housing authority and indirectly by HUD, because as I said earlier, there's a declaration of trust tied to every public housing unit, which means that it allows it to be subsidized by HUD, which means HUD controls pretty much everything we do at a housing authority, whether it is federally funded or not. Whatever our ventures are, we have to report everything to HUD. We're funded primarily through the federal government. And the way housing authorities survive, though, because subsidies don't meet the need, right? And so you may have a building that needs repair or issues. Construction needs change in terms of the cost, right, over time. So the subsidies don't necessarily. And so as construction costs go up, it often does not meet, it is not matched by the subsidies that we receive. The ideal situation for a housing authority to be in is to be able to manage those federally subsidized units, but also have a private arm through non-federally subsidized units, which it provides still at an affordable range, which it can use the resources and the revenues as non-discretionary income to be able to support those public housing units. And so, like, for example, in Charleston, we had about 1,400 public housing units, but we also had about 1,000 non-public housing units, which we were able to use the revenues from that. We call that our cash cow. But we still offered it, you know, to workforce families, people still within an affordable housing range. But we were able to use the resources for that to supplement the needs of our public housing projects. If the only resource a housing authority has is federal funds, then it's extremely limited in what it can do. It has to break out and diversify its portfolio. The way you do that is through partnerships. So, for example, we, you know, through Delegate Henson's initiative and recommendation, she helped us facilitate applying for a weatherization grant for Robinwood to upgrade. So we're still waiting to hear, cross our fingers. So that for a $600,000 grant. So we're hoping to get that. That would help us with those units. So that's an example of different efforts that we're doing, and there need to be a lot more.
We got a lot in, didn't we? Thank you, everyone. I hope your questions got answered. Thank you to both.
And we have our county executive, Stuart Pittman, and one of our delegates, Shanika Henson. And unfortunately, Mayor Buckley was called away. He had to go back to Australia. So Dewan Gay is covering for him. He's at a community forum and he's rushing over here, so he'll probably come blasting through, you know, in the middle of this. So, yeah,
shame on him.
So anyway, so bear with us. This has been exciting between the legislative session and never knowing if Shanika had to go vote on something and everything else. So we really appreciate both of you being here.
Yeah, thank you both for doing this. So I'll do a short setup again. We already talked about how many people might be moving here and how little affordable housing there is. The policy landscape on housing is shifting too, isn't it? I don't know if you can feel those winds from where you're situated politically. There are some bolder proposals across the country for dealing with the affordable housing crisis. In Maryland and Virginia in the legislature, they're talking about rolling back single-family only zoning to some degree. Minneapolis, probably the first in the nation, they just got rid of single-family only zoning across the city. You can build a duplex or a triplex anywhere. They did that as part of their Minneapolis 2040 plan. So there's a version of that in Oregon. So things are changing. I'm just generally interested, and I think a lot of people are, in how you create. Part of this is a market thing, right? Not enough housing, there's too much demand, it drives prices up, people want to build their way out of it, and building needs to happen. But how do you create the supply without making things even less stable for the lowest income and most vulnerable renters? So, Delegate Henson, you're delegate or senator? Delegate. Thank you. I always want to get that mixed up.
So far.
For now. So, Delegate Henson. Delegate Stewart has gotten some press for a proposal he's put in the legislature for, would have some deeply affordable, what he calls social housing. His legislation would roll back some of the single-family only zoning statewide. What else have you seen at the state level this session? I know it's young, but that might impact Anne Arundel County on the housing front.
Thank you. So I have to thank the panel, thank Action Annapolis for organizing this, and for all of you for being so invested in affordable housing and making sure that this city is a place that's welcoming and has a home for everyone who wants to live here and enjoy the Annapolis experience and add to the culture of what Annapolis has to offer. I, in the Annapolis delegation, I serve with Delegate Alice Kane and Senator Sarah Elfreth. And we are all very committed to making sure that we do our part to make sure that the housing policy that we champion and we vote for and we support and we put forward is carrying that message. And our mayor would be here, but like you mentioned, he is back home tending to his mother, Miss Pauline. So we send our thoughts, our prayers there with Gavin as he's there, because he is a very big champion of affordable housing as well. He always brings his international perspective. One of the first things he said was that my mom, as he calls her, lives in public housing in Australia, and how it's such a different perspective. There it is the gold standard, because the government has to hold itself to the highest accountability in Australia. Whatever the standards are, the government is the very first line of defense. When there are new policies, new environmental standards, whatever is the new standard, it is not the private industry that's leading the way, it is the government that's leading the way there. So to live in public housing in Australia is a far different experience than to live in public housing here in the United States. So for him to see and experience the conditions that we have here were very different for him. So we have our county executive who is making strides by leaps and bounds of progress than what we have seen in a very long time. by way of affordable housing. The amount of progress that we could have hoped for in probably 2 terms have already happened. So we're so thankful to have someone who is a thought leader and progressive like Stuart has been by way of fair and affordable housing. So it's refreshing to serve with such wonderful leaders on all levels of government. It is my great privilege. So when you ask me about what policy initiatives are still new and still on the horizon, even though we have...
Yeah, what might we see this session, you know?
So this session, one of the things that really caught my attention, I get the pleasure of serving on the Appropriations Committee, where we take a look at the state's operating budget, capital budget, have a $46.6 billion operating budget for the state of Maryland. And then our capital budget, up and down, all the different bonds that we take out in Maryland. There was a bill that came across they read the bills across the House floor, and this particular bill had a $233 billion fiscal note. And I said, what could cost $233 billion? And it was a bill to fully fund affordable housing.
People do wonder what that number is.
Yes. It took all of the different special funds, the different trust funds that we have, NED, the National Capital Strategies Fund, it took Bernie, the Baltimore Regional Fund, it took all of the different funds that we had, and then it said that in every fiscal year, you have to spend in every one of the 47 legislative districts at a minimum $5 million doing capital projects in each of those districts to support affordable housing. And that bill came across, and it said that if you did that and you fully invested in affordable housing, that it would cost $233 billion.
Is that bill still in the committee?
It went before Senator Elfrid's committee. It has not gotten to mine yet. So I'll be interested to see if they fell out of their chairs, blew out of their chairs, what that reaction was like. But it was by a very bold senator, Senator Ellis, who represents Charles County. Charles County has very similar demographics to the city of Annapolis, the district that he represents there. But what it let me know is how far behind we are with the way that we are funding housing. Right now, what we had in the budget is $18 billion for housing initiatives for the Department of Housing and Community Development. So if we're at $18 billion and $233 billion gets you where you should be, then we still are not doing enough.
What about the HOME Act at the state level? I mean, Anne Arundel did it, Baltimore County did it. This is a bill that would ban landlords from discriminating against potential tenants based on their source of income. Like, oh, you get veterans benefits, oh, you use Section 8. No, they wouldn't be able to do that anymore. And Delegate Lafferty has had a bill almost every year for the past 10 years trying to do the HOME Act. I mean, Baltimore County shut that down just 4 years ago, but they did just pass it last year, and you all got it too. So what about a statewide HOME Act?
I was gonna pass the microphone to my colleague, our county executive, because he very boldly did that at the county level, with the support of supporters like people in this room. He had some naysayers, but he had much more people who supported him on that initiative. The city of Annapolis did that. But for statewide support, I did co-sponsor that bill. But like you said, that bill has come before the House, before the Senate, very many years. It's made it out of the House before too. But it's the Senate where it's seen some tough times.
We got new leadership.
We got new leadership in the Senate. So we'll see if it's able to make its way.
I'll put it down as a we'll see.
We'll put it down as a we'll see.
Okay. All right. County Executive Pittman. There's a story in my book. It starts in 2011 when the county council here said, we're going to do a workforce housing bill. If you want to do workforce housing in some place that's zoned for 2 units per acre, like a single family area, if you make some of those units affordable, you can go up to 22 units per acre. Like you can build apartments in single family zoning if you include affordable units. And it sat for 3 years, and as soon as a developer tried to use it, the county council turned around in 2015 and almost completely gutted the bill. And so just in 4 years, you had that dramatic turnaround. I mean, maybe in 2011, you're coming out of a foreclosure crisis and people are really pinched and they really want the workforce housing. Regardless, 2015, it's gone. How did you feel the political winds behind you to push through not just bringing back some of that density bonus, but also a source of income discrimination ban? How did you know? Like, how did that happen? The 4 years got flipped around, and y'all flipped it back in 19.
I don't think I care. I mean, about the political wins. No, seriously.
I mean, they're real.
They are real. And when I ran, I talked about affordable housing, and the Anne Arundel County Affordable Housing Coalition held a candidates forum, and I debated Steve Shue on it, and there were council members there that talked about affordable housing, and came out of that in the campaign talking about affordable housing. And people were really disgusted by the council hearing when Councilman Grasso and others
I was there.
Yeah. And so it wasn't just me, but Lisa Rodvian, who's here. Councilwoman Rodvian, are you here? Yeah. Yes, thank you. One of our big advocates on that. And the 3 Democrats, the 4 Democrats.
Yeah, you had a lot of the council turned over.
We did not get the Republicans on board. We did have opposition from the Association of Landlords, basically. Came into our office, we met with them and listened to them. So there was some opposition, there was a little bit of that same tone from some of the opposition, but we knew we had the votes going in when the bill went in. So we did the workforce housing bill and we got some pushback on that. I mean, part of the story about that when it was in effect before that was sad was that it sat there for 3 years and nobody proposed any workforce housing. No developer actually said, okay, I want to build workforce housing under these conditions.
You also had a state law where the county council could have just gotten together if the developer was using a low-income housing tax credit bill. The county council could have just gotten together and exercised a local veto and said, we don't want that at all. They wouldn't have even gotten to the workforce.
And the low-income housing tax credit deals in the county, the previous county executive wasn't very supportive of them. I signed on in support of the ones that came down this year. And there was one very interesting one that I really wish the governor had agreed to, or that the state had agreed to, because it was in Severna Park off of Route 2, similar area, and it was very low income. It was going to go down to 30% at some of the units, but it was not high density. So that was going to be a real test of, is your concern about density, or is your concern about who lives there?
Right. Is it the river?
Yeah. So anyway, but I don't know if the public opinion has changed in that period of time. I just think that, and I have to give credit to those of you who organized, that we went in there not only knowing we would have 4 votes, but a new organization called Anne Arundel Connecting Together ACT, it's an IAF community organizing group, they had a 1,200 person founding meeting during the election, but they had a 600 person meeting right here in this neighborhood, and they said, we're going to be there. And they were there in their shirts, and they packed the council
AIF
chambers.
is the same that Build is part of, right? Is that
Same network. Yeah. And so that was something that was new too. We had a mobilized group of people who were fighting for this.
Okay. So then, what else is possible? I mean, the analysis of impediments recommends that this county get an inclusionary zoning law passed, and what this would do is say, you want to develop this many units or more, then you have to make sure that a certain percentage of them, 12, 15%, are affordable. Yeah. Montgomery County has one of these. Howard County has one. The city doesn't produce anything, but the city has one. So.
Although if the city had not had one, 0 would have been produced. It has produced some. So yeah, Anne Arundel County didn't do it. Even the Chamber of Commerce was saying years ago that we need to do something about affordable housing because of the workforce, problems, and suggested that be done. Our general development plan 10 years ago said we needed this inclusionary zoning bill, but it did not happen. It requires developers to do a certain percentage of their units as affordable. And if you're a developer, you're doing luxury homes, you want to maximize your profits, that's not something you're in support of. And in this county, developers have gotten most of what they wanted and have made pretty big profits. Most of them are regional. But the council and the county executives have not been willing to drive that tough bargain and say, we're going to require something of you. So yeah, we're going to do a bill. We've had a work group working on it. About 6, your families is on it. It's not as simple as I thought, because there's a lot of them have been done, and there's a lot of information about what works and doesn't work, and how long they remain affordable, and what percentage of units. And I have a document here that's got about 12 questions that they're going through. And but we will have a bill ready. When is it going to be ready, Lisa?
I think we probably have one more work session to hammer out the last details before it's ready to be introduced.
All right, so Anne Arundel County, will you have an inclusionary zoning bill this year?
Yeah. Don't quote me on that. Oh, this year, definitely this year.
Okay.
Definitely this year.
But yeah, I mean, it sounds great, and it sounds great to say we have a workforce housing bill, and it sounds great to say we passed a fair housing ordinance finally, but that ain't squat if we don't produce units. That's right. So we have to get to the point where we can have numerical goals. We had a meeting this morning about a tiny homes project that we want to do. I was actually at the hotels on 198 today, where, believe it or not, that's our affordable housing, is those hotels on 198, meeting with the owners. And so, no, we're not going to shut those down. We're going to help them fix them up, but we got to actually provide housing.
Okay. So Anne Arundel, and I think the city of Annapolis have general development plans that are in the works. I'll try to describe it, and you can fix my description, but basically, like, we're thinking about the next 20 years, big comprehensive plan of how we're going to zone, how we're going to build, what we're going to do. And did I get it okay? Yeah. Okay. Anne Arundel 2040. Well, Minneapolis just did Minneapolis 2040, and they got rid of single-family only zoning. And I talked to the city council president when I was up there in Minneapolis, Lisa Bender, and she's like, "Do you know how much organizing it took to make that happen?" They didn't just like put a bill in one day, like, "We're gonna change parking fees and get rid of single-family zoning." You know, like they were on the streets for 2 years, working with people, talking to people. They didn't do it in certain neighborhoods because they didn't want fights between neighborhoods, like, "Oh, you're getting duplexes and we're not." They did it across the whole city, and it was a lot of organizing. So what a perspective, from your perspective as elected officials, and you talked about IAF, like, what do you see happening, giving you, running interference for you to get these things through?
I don't see that happening in Anne Arundel County anytime soon. And the reason is that most people live in neighborhoods that are single family and zoned single family, and that it would be, the outcry would be unbelievable. Here's
Not even just any organizing for any stuff you're doing.
Right, but and I wouldn't push it that hard, because getting back to this issue of actually creating units, right. To me, one of the things that Anne Arundel County has done is develop by sprawl, and plans have not really been adhered to. And what I've found is that, and we have a very strong environmental advocacy community, and what I've found is there's 3 stools to sustainable growth. There's affordable housing, there's environmental protection, and there's smart growth. And the smart growth part of that makes it work in my mind, which is that you do transit-oriented development, which gets cars off the road. We have some train stations that there's plenty of development potential around. You get people off this thing where density is bad, and you do density in those areas, and you develop there, and you can do affordable housing in those locations, and also do things like accessory dwelling units that are in every neighborhood where you can actually produce a lot of units.
And these are like teeny little houses out back.
Yeah, granny, what do they call it? Granny garages.
In Vancouver, they call them laneways.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just
so
much
I think all of those things get us somewhere, and I think I can sell all of those things to the public. I don't think I can sell no more single-family zoning.
I'm going to come back to that. I want to ask you a question. So this is clear. This is not just a market issue, like I was saying. It's not just building more supply to meet the demand. I'm going to skip that question. I want to ask you. I saw you quoted in the paper talking about doing some legislation to address issues raised in that HACA lawsuit, to quote, address systemic problems that led to this. And I want to hear more about that. What are those systemic issues, and what's this legislation going to be?
So the legislation, what it does is the Housing Authority, as Ms. Maddox Evans stated, is enabled by the state code, the Housing and Community Development article. It establishes, it says there shall be a housing authority of the city of Annapolis. And when it puts forward the Housing Authority of the City of Annapolis, the larger body, Title 12 of that same code, it has a bunch of different statutes that apply statewide. And one of them says that the city, wherever the city or the county, whatever the overarching municipality or local government structure is, that they have an ability to change some of their planning laws, some of their zoning laws, their sanitary housing laws, if they need to, for the operation of the housing authority, to give them flexibility, understanding that our authorities have a structure where they're funded by government dollars, so it might not always meet the same structure of a private entity. So what the, not commenting on the specific lawsuit, but in an instance where you have a public housing entity and they are not able to do what a private owner of a private residence that's a rental housing is able to do, it gives the government that flexibility to treat them differently. What it does not do is give the ability to discriminate against public housing residents. So what we did is we drafted a provision that says this does not give the ability to discriminate against public housing residents. We never believed that was the legislative intent of Title 12. We never believed that it should have been used or to justify purposes of discrimination. And I don't believe that anyone who's operated under that code could rightfully say that it should be used for that purpose. So we won't allow that to happen.
Okay. And speaking of systemic issues, and this I write about this a lot in my book, I mean, there's a long history of racist sentiment tied to opposition to low-income housing in higher-income areas. And local control has always enabled that. So, as far as all that goes, where is Anne Arundel County in 2020?
Yeah, I think that there's always the code words, there's the language that's used when people, resources and distribution of resources and how people want to allocate them. When people think that there are black or brown faces that are going to be the recipients of those resources or benefits, we know that that can sometimes, more often than not, come with people wanting to hold back those resources. Like our federal government, for instance, the FHA mortgage can be given, you get that with a 3% down payment. That is a federal subsidy. But people don't have the same stigma attached to that. People don't begrudgingly give that benefit. They don't call people takers who have an FHA mortgage. They don't have that same negative implication or stigma attached. But someone who lives in a public housing community, they do. But one reason is they are able to. If your address is Tyler Avenue after the 1100 block, everyone knows that you live in Robinwood. Yeah. But if your address is Tyler Avenue before the 1100 block, no one knows if you have an FHA-backed mortgage if you put down 3% or 20%. So you give people the ability to discriminate against people, so there is still an incredible stigma attached to who we believe is benefiting from government resources in this country.
I mean, our river is already making our dogs sick, and we can't have all this building because of the runoff. And here's how he ended his comment. Gentlemen, we live in the county because we like the suburban single-family lifestyle. And that just seems a little incompatible to be using the single-family lifestyle to be making an environmental argument. But forest conservation, you guys have a new law, it is a real concern. But the answer with so many people potentially coming here can't be to just stop, creating housing units. So I'm just wondering, and you sort of touched on this, to what degree is this county ready for a shift away from single-family living to embrace maybe more public transit and denser development around transit and all the other stuff that has to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I try to...
And I live in a single-family house, so I'm not trying to cut y'all.
Yeah.
Okay, but,
I mean, I try to see the best in everybody. And I try not to assume the worst. That when somebody says that they like living in a rural area, that they like living in a rural area. It's not a racist statement. Or even if they say that they like living in a suburban area and like to cut grass. Because there are people who also like to live in apartments where they don't have to drive and where they can work and go out to dinner. And, you know, that's sort of there's a life choice, and there are people of all races that have both, you know, that go both ways on that. Not to say that, I mean, I have heard a lot of things said by environmentalists that jump over to racism pretty quick. I mean, I've seen that too.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but
No, that's not what I'm looking for. Tell me what they said.
yeah, I mean, I was in a community where this guy was who I thought, you know, I already thought, you know, kind of like this guy, I thought, you know, and he went into this thing about development, and then the next thing you knew, he used the example of public housing as, you know, what he didn't want. So public housing, I mean, that's a code word, but but this question about whether Anne Arundel County is saying that we're closed to development, we're closed to people that aren't like us, you know, those two things in some people's minds are pretty close. And I think that this smart growth concept, you know, this idea of transit-oriented development and building town centers and building community and spaces where people can gather and be people and do redevelopment in areas where, you know, there's land to do redevelopment. It's something that I think is inclusive, and you know, we want to build community, and we have to deal with racism. I mean, we have racism in a big way. We're the #1 hate bias county in the state of Maryland, and our numbers have been increasing steadily, which is why we put up the new signs that say "For all under the best place" in every entrance to the county just about a few weeks ago. And we have to deal with those issues, and we have to deal with you know, with equity in schools and opportunity gap, and we have to deal with income. I mean, when we talk about affordable housing, part of the reason housing ain't affordable is because people don't have the income to afford it. You know, I mean, somebody in $1 million home is in affordable housing if they make enough money to buy a $1 million home. So, you know, raising the minimum wage, I mean, that was probably the most important thing that the state legislature did last year. And we can get incomes up to the point where, and other expenses down to the point, and healthcare, so people don't have that kind of expense, and get to the point where more housing, they can afford more housing.
So is smart growth then in the growth plan?
It's a part, yeah, it's a part.
Is that the conduit to get some of this done?
That's the conduit, I think, in this county to build a lot more housing to accommodate more people is, to me, smart growth. Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm going to throw a couple questions at both of you. I'm just interested in your answers. One is just what you're learning from other places. Like, I was just really interested in what Minneapolis has done. I'm not saying that Anne Arundel County is going to ban single-family zoning, but, you know, what are you learning from other places, whether it's outside Maryland, Howard, Montgomery, wherever, that you're most intrigued by as something that could happen through legislation here?
One of the things that I'm working on this session is a bill to regulate indoor air quality as it relates to mold. We have a big issue with mold inside of our rental housing in Annapolis. Yes. Not just our public housing, but rental housing. And I thought that was just a regional issue, but as I looked at it, we had that in military housing. We had that in our dormitories at the University of Maryland. We have that in condo associations in the areas that are the common elements that are commonly maintenance. We have that throughout the state. So I started to look at what other states are doing to address mold and what standards there are. And 15 other states in Washington, D.C. have standards for indoor air quality. And states that are have much more moisture in the air naturally than we do. Louisiana has standards, Florida has standards, but Maryland does not. We don't say how much moisture is too much moisture inside. We don't have standards that say if we have standing water somewhere, what's your duty to report? What do you have to do in terms of remediation? We don't have those standards for the state of Maryland. So I started to look and say, what can we do to bring ourselves up to par with what other states are doing? And so I have a very enterprising intern that's working in my office this session, and I asked him to compile all the standards, and he said, delegate, I looked at them and I know how hard you work and how much you really, love the people in your district, and I thought this just wasn't good enough for them. So I looked at the World Health Organization and I saw what they're doing in Sweden, and I thought this was way better. And I tried not to look too impressed, and I said, well, thank you, Sam. And it was. So I'm looking to see what they're doing and putting that bill forward to make sure that as a state we are doing our due diligence. And I really see that as a way to preserve what we have already. 42% of the rental housing in the city of Annapolis is public or subsidized. And in District 30A, 37% of our rental housing is public or subsidized. And we have to absolutely preserve what we have, because to your data point of the influx of people that will be coming into our county, we want to make sure that we have places that everyone can live, and our goal is to add to that stock to make sure that we have even more. But what has happened is over time we have lost units of affordable public and subsidized housing, so we certainly want to be able to preserve it.
Okay.
So this is an example that's never been done, but it's not local. I had a meeting this morning with a group that came in from mostly George Mason University, but the leader of this group, who is creating an economic model to deal with social determinants of health, which are all the things, including housing as a social determinant of health. And what they're doing is they picked 12 jurisdictions in the country, and they're narrowing it down. So we were sort of pitching in Arundel County, and I think we did a good job. We're meeting again tomorrow. And what they do is you come up with a project, and one of the two projects we pitched was tiny homes. And they quantify economically the benefits of doing this project. The benefits to whether it's hospitals, insurance companies, employers, private sector, as well as public sector. And the economists do that part. And then they basically raise money. They put together the plan with the money, and the money is public and private. And it's something that just, it really clicked to me, because I'm already thinking that the best way to measure the success of government isn't the size of the tax base, it's the health and wellness of the people in the jurisdiction. And when you talk about health, everybody supports health. It's really all that matters. Money doesn't matter, health matters. And so use that prism and deal with a lot of different issues. And housing is one of them. And I'm talking about it because it's brand new today and I'm all excited about it. And we may end up with a tiny home project as a result of this, and it may be funded not only publicly but also privately.
Although I was, not to knock it, but I was, with the ADUs and the tiny homes, there's a little aspect of it for me that's like, we found there's something affordable. It's this big. So what is how do you roll out tiny homes? Who are they for? Like, how does that work?
Well, so we were talking about taking populations that need support services. So whether it was people coming out of addiction treatment, or veterans, or some group that needs support. So you have the tiny homes, and then you have the little clubhouse there, and people live as a community there, and there's some support.
Okay, thank you. All right. So this is again for both of you. So much else ties into affordable housing besides housing, right? Touched on this. Public schools and how they're tied up in home values and resistance to integration. Public transit that can get people out of cars and into denser communities. Real anti-racist work. Like, I wonder if you just kind of give us some thoughts on what Anne Arundel needs beyond more housing and more affordable housing for housing to work for everybody.
For what was the last part? Housing.
For more housing, more affordable housing, and just for housing to work for everybody here. Beyond housing. Like how to jobs and transit and everything. It's a big question, but
yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that I've been scratching my head a little bit about is our economic development folks sell in Arundel County to employers, right? And they say this is a great place to do business, and it's not a hard pitch because of our location and our economy and the economic drivers that we have in the state. Some of them come in with jobs that don't pay enough to live here, and some of them are pretty good paying jobs. But either way, we don't really have the housing. So why aren't we having a conversation with those potential employers about what they're going to do to help us to create the housing for the people that they will be bringing to our jurisdiction?
Okay.
So it's a shift in how you think about economic development, and it is asking more, driving a little bit of a harder bargain, but we're in such a good position, and right now we have more jobs than people to fill those jobs. We can do that, and we can do innovative things because of how the demand here.
Right. Okay. Nelly?
So thank you for an opportunity to plug this in the open door, because our Speaker of the House, Adrian Jones, has said that the priority is the blueprint for Maryland schools. House Bill 1 and House Bill 2. House Bill 1 is a $2.2 billion Built to Learn Act that is going to invest in Maryland schools to make sure that we have schools that are adequately built to support the learning model that we want to bring to the schools, which is the blueprint for Maryland's future. And that was done by Dr. Britt Kerwin and a commission of academics who have sat down for the last 3 years to say what is going to be the next frontier for Maryland's education system. And they have come up with a framework of how we are going to educate the next generation of students in Maryland. It has 4 distinct building blocks of what that framework looks like that they break down into different categories. But one of the things that it does that is most revolutionary is investment into high-need schools and high-need students.
Yes.
It identifies different community schools. It starts with 80% free and reduced lunch students, and then it goes down to 75%, 70% schools that have students who receive free and reduced lunch meals. And then it makes some different investments in those schools. It puts in those schools medical and then also social resources in those schools to make sure that we have wraparound services to help support those students. It revolutionizes the way that we deliver education to those students. It makes sure that we have our students graduate high school, college, or career ready when they graduate, so that our students enter into the job or labor market or the college field ready on day one for whatever their next path is in life. So if you want to have healthy communities, you have to have people who can enter and engage those communities in a healthy way, because we could build the very best housing, but if we don't have the very best people who can embody that housing, then we haven't done our due diligence as well. So that's something that we can do to absolutely support the housing.
Okay, thanks. The last question for you both is just sort of conduits to get this work done outside of legislation, right? You've got Anne Arundel 2040. You've got this big multi-year general development plan. You've got one in Annapolis. You've got the Baltimore Metro Council working with the local government here to do a new analysis of impediments to fair housing. This is getting big, long-range plans on paper to guide policy. And I'm just wondering, at the state level and at the county level, what's happening to, I mean, you gotta manage day to day, you gotta get fire alarms in Robinwood, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. What's happening to create a place for these, this affordable housing work in those kinds of more structural?
Someone who I found great camaraderie with in working on housing policy during my time on the council too. So is an advocate for this type of work as well. So from all levels of government, there are an infinite number of ways to get involved.
Okay.
Is that the question, is ways to get involved? Is that what you're
Well, yeah, but I mean, also like putting long-range plans in place, this general development plan, the analysis of impediments, where you're kind of saying like, here are our issues and here are our long-range plans to get there. Some of it is just recommendations for policy, but like how is that being used to further affordable housing, and how can people get involved in that process? I know they can for the plan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the long-range plan, the best thing that you can do long-range is organize. Just organize. I loved hearing about the work in Baltimore that, what's it called, the Workers United? Yeah, I mean, my God, wow. You know, we have the general development plan process is going to be going on, and people can get involved in that. There are going to be regional plans for all the 9 new regions in the county that are going to be kind of exciting to work on. I am excited about Baltimore Metropolitan Council. At first, I'm a member of the board as a county executive, and I didn't think I didn't have, I was like, I have to go to these meetings. That's, I guess, gonna be terrible. But the guy who's the director, Mike Kelly, started out doing like homeless resource work in Baltimore City, believe it or not. And I had a separate meeting with him about regional planning and housing and transportation issues. And there are exciting possibilities really to work regionally, I think, and really to help Baltimore City, where I mean we got to be willing to admit that we stole the tax base out of Baltimore City. All the suburbs did. They say come to us, and now our residents are sort of saying, why do we do that? But I think there are a lot of things that we can do regionally on planning to help Baltimore City, I guess the other thing I want to say is something that, to make government work, in addition to public, community engagement and all of that, in our office, we've done a few things. We've got a new position of Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Health and Human Services, a woman who is really coordinating all of the Health and Human Services agencies and making it possible to move forward on an agenda. Another person on land use doing that. And then we're about to start a open data portal, and a Rundlestat, where measuring the work of government agencies and the work of programs, so that you can go online and you can look at what's going on. You can look at maps of your community and see what we're doing in your community. And I believe that, this isn't something new to, it is new to Anne Arundel County. Other governments have done this. But we have really good people working on it. It's going to be rolled out in February. You're going to see the first one. That's going to be for police department because they have a lot of really good data. And what I think that's going to do is it's going to make government more accessible. People are going to be more inclined to engage. They're going to be able to see whether there's success. And we're going to be able to make better decisions too. So I'm really optimistic about it.
Speaking of engagement, thank you. I'm going to put this mic up here again and let y'all come up.
Crime statistics. And her point of view was that we have such high hate crime statistics because we report them. In many other jurisdictions we don't. What do you say to that?
Well, she should not have said that, first of all. She does not know that the others are not reporting them. In fact, the two next largest counties, the two largest counties that were below us had higher populations. So if you did it per capita, we would not only be the highest number in the state, but we would be much higher on the list because we're smaller than the counties that were below us. The trend in the state of Maryland was going up, and it dropped a little in this last year. We continue to go up. For every reported hate bias incident, there are probably 100 or 1,000 that don't go reported.
That's right.
So the way I see the hate bias report with the numbers is it's a wake-up call, it's a call to action, and I don't want to get into whether other people were reporting or not or try to make us look good because we have the highest number. Show up February 22nd at Anne Arundel Community College, Kauffman Amphitheater, for our Hate Bias Summit. It's going to be a 6 to 9 p.m. 3-hour thing. We're going to have the Justice Department coming in, talking about what is a hate crime. We're going to have a session about changing the law, which Delegate Mark Chang has a bill in that I testified on both last year and this year, and that I think will pass this year. Please show up. Go ahead.
Delegate Henson, I have a question about the Kerwin commissions, the budget. What is it, 2-something million?
Yeah.
So what happens if Hogan vetoes that? Can you explain what the process is? If he vetoes it, then what happens?
Override that song.
Can you override in the budget? Because I know you can other things, but with the budget, isn't it like,
That's an excellent question. So generally, the governor's budget, when it comes to us, the operating budget, It goes to one chamber first. It alternates years. This year it goes to the Senate first, an even number of years, and then it goes to the House first in odd number of years. But once the Senate and the House both vote on the budget, generally the governor does not have to then vote on the budget. It just then is passed, but it's adopted by both chambers. But the capital budget then is its own separate bill. And so HB1 is a bill because it is a capital program. So he would have an opportunity to veto HB1 because it is a capital budget initiative and it is a bill separate and apart from the state's operating budget. So it does have support in both chambers. It was filed on the Senate side and the House side, and the sponsors of that are the Senate President and the Speaker of the House. But it is not veto-proof from the governor. There would be support in both chambers, presumably, to override a veto from the governor, but you're absolutely right that it is something that still needs to have support and advocacy because it could be vetoed. To show your support for that?
Like how would,
Same thing you do for sending emails, testifying, supporting, sending letters, making sure that people who represent, who vote on these know that it has the support from the community and people who will be impacted by the quality of the schools and the students who come out of these schools who will be working and supporting all the different jobs that impact the lives that we all have. So,
you're familiar with Dogwood Acres and what is happening with that little last bastion of affordability. And if your tiny homes and social determinants project goes forward, I might
announced that they're going to shut it down regardless of whether Elm Street's deal goes through. And I guess their thinking is that if they kick everybody out, then it's going to be, then the next developer that comes in won't have the political problem to deal with of the residents being there. And so I don't know whether their proposal will go through plan and zoning because there are traffic issues and there are trees and there's all kinds of things that have to do that. But the way it stands right now is that they have the right to kick them out. The landowner does, and to shut them down. And we're looking at the possibility of legislation to preserve mobile home parks in this county because they're vulnerable, but very, very vulnerable.
So just so you know, there is a national financing vehicle which is available so that the residents can form a cooperative and purchase the park. It's called Rock USA. They're out of New Hampshire, and I was talking to Delia Fagnall today because if that transaction hasn't been consummated, I mean, somebody should evaluate whether that's a possibility.
Yeah, those residents are actually on top of that. There are some pretty sophisticated folks who are working on that.
Thank you. Good.
Hello, my name is Sukara Bridgers. I founded a program here in Annapolis for cosmetology-minded youths, and my question is about ex-offenders, people that have done their time and they have even acquired some type of college education in prison and they come home and they don't have anywhere to live, and Housing Authority, I guess, cannot have them on the property. So is there anything in place for ex-offenders that have a place to live when they come home besides a halfway house?
No, I mean that's the unfortunate answer. But there's not housing necessarily available. We've just been finishing a big analysis of all of our reentry programs, and we're figuring out what we can do in this budget and what of the proposals that Derek Matthews has been working on this has come up with it. And transportation is a big one that we think we were going to be able to wrap our arms around. The other is starting while they're still in with a lot of the work, training, more training, and job placement. But no, housing, we don't really have.
Well, just because the person has a job, where they gonna go? Yes. Where they gonna live at? So.
Thank you for your question. To that point too, making sure that we have expungements that are available and making sure that we are continuing to build the body of offenses that can be expunged and providing pathways to allowing people to clear their criminal history once they have rehabilitated themselves, served their time, paid their debt, so that they have a pathway forward in life, so that we reduce recidivism rates, so that people have a clear path forward. One of the things that we did today was overrode the governor's veto on the ban the box legislation that was introduced by Delegate Nick Mosby. And that legislation says that employers cannot ask on an application about a person's criminal convictions. So they still can later on, so that employers have the ability to know for any other reasons that they might have for security purposes to satisfy their needs. But on an employment application, it gives the person the opportunity to at least get the job, the opportunity to interview on their own merit, so that they can get before the employer and have a chance to be evaluated for what they could bring to the table before they hit those barriers to re-entry. So we are always looking at ways to open doors. And to the point of exclusionary zoning, or inclusionary, zoning that we discussed earlier, once cities, municipals take on different ways to provide affordable housing that doesn't have that federal regulatory framework, it gives the ability to not always be beholden to a structure that requires a majority vote of everyone in the country's representatives to be able to make progress. So when we have inclusionary zoning, you don't have those barriers that are imposed. You can simply have the structure, the framework that's set up by your own city government, because you don't have those barriers in the affordable housing units in Annapolis that are the result of the moderately priced dwelling unit legislation. That's not one of the things that they're required to screen for. So I think that there's ways to make progress on that on a local level, and a variety of ways to tackle that.
Thank you.
I want to say something really quick on that I forgot to mention earlier, that we created in the budget last year in Anne Arundel County a new rental assistance program, and it's not huge. It's only about $500,000, or $700,000, I think it is. But it's going to be targeted primarily to people coming out of homeless shelters for transitional housing. But there's the potential to grow it. We're going to do a housing trust fund bill and try to figure out a way to fund a housing trust fund that goes real estate. Hey, look who's here! Come on. And that could potentially be used for rental assistance for reentry.
Thank you guys for sharing your passion and your heart for it. I have kind of a question that's kind of maybe a bigger question. I live in a small town in Colorado, and with the ski resort there, like the housing prices have gone up so much, and I asked at our ski resort, how do we live in a sustainable way, thinking about all aspects of community, and their main answer was affordable housing, but I thought, well, maybe there's more answers as far as whether it's promoting certain values of community, because money can't fill you completely, we need relationships, or whether it also regulations such as how expensive a house can be sold for, or something like that. Like I like your thought of income, addressing income inequality as well. But what are some other ideas like that that you guys have? I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, the clubhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think building a sense of place and community is part of what developers are starting to figure out how to do well. The good developers and these sort of town center areas. And that's one of the things I think that's been made tiny homes popular. I mean, the TV shows is what's really doing it, but that people they're doing it. It's sustainable, and sometimes they're doing it in community, and you can create these communities. But I think it's sort of good planning and good development.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Alderman Arnett if he had any ideas on that. The city of Annapolis is a diligent sector studier, and so they have lots of micro-targeted data on what works where. And so, to the point of your question about making sure that we are studying what works where and how to make sure we have different and creative models for how to make communities and make communities that are sustainable, and housing that addresses a variety of different ways of living. I don't know if there's anything on the horizon with the comprehensive plan or any of the studies.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that. First of all, I wanted to comment. I hope all of you do too, privileged to be represented by such great people. And it turns out we're doing a great natural experiment, and it has to do with the Forest Drive Eastport sector study. And I was listening to the discussion on the city public housing, and I think one of our problems is we silo things so much that we almost make it impossible for things to work. And what's happening with the Forest Drive and Eastport sector study is a task force that is working at the city level, the county level, and the state level with not only citizens, but staff. And boy, we're finding out a lot about how we're not really talking to each other, and we're really developing mechanisms so that we can talk to each other. And we're gonna have to solve these things together. We can't solve it a little bit here or a little bit there. And I think that was part of your statement too, that we've got to really get our collective act together. These things are coming upon us. Housing is only one part of the broader planning picture. We're in the right place because we're working on the sector study and the development plan, GDP. I'm an economist. I'm used to gross domestic product, but the general development plan. And this is actually the right time. A lot of things, and I was just telling Dewan, and you can let him speak about this. Our legislation on the accessory dwelling units in the city is going to be a bellwether test of how dealing with single-family zoning is going to go over. And I can tell you, it's even more controversial than the short-term rental legislation already. So it's going to be a biggie, but I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, well, if you wanted to ask your question, okay. So yeah, we have this legislation, and my apologies for being late. We had a gun violence task force over in Eastport, so I had to make that commitment. But we have this legislation in right now for accessory dwelling units, which I'm really excited about. I think it's the first step in the conversation in Annapolis when we talk about affordable housing outside of public housing. Where we have to start providing these options in our other wards. And as Ross mentioned, we're getting some pushback in terms of the zoning and the parking requirements and stuff like that. But if you look around the country, other cities and states have already taken on this task because they realize how important housing is. When we first drafted this legislation, we looked at California, who, their model could be shaped differently. I'm also looking now at various municipalities in Virginia and things like that, just at how we can follow this model to make sure that we get the zoning right, the lot size right, to make sure that we provide the opportunity for off-street parking, and we address the issue of now it's just a single family lot, or what does it become? Is this now a duplex? So we're still working on the behind the scene language with the Department of Planning and Zoning. I am faithful. I believe that we can get this, done in an appropriate amount of time, and I think that we can work with our neighbors and whatever ward it is, and really nail out some of the harsh issues that we have to, deal with in our council meetings and through dialogue. And we'll come up with a refined bill. We've taken it back to the stages, so everybody doesn't have to panic about the 1,000 square foot buildings anymore. But we're getting it all in shape, and I'd definitely be happy to take questions on that tonight as well.
But wait a minute, because you made a good point about tiny houses, and so yeah, we can do all of this thing where we're going to do the ancillary dwelling units for this really teeny tiny house. Is that really the housing that you want?
I think so, Ross, because I can't afford to live in the city of Annapolis right now. And I think that's the purpose of the accessory dwelling units, is because it's geared toward it's not for a family of 5 to move into. It's for whether it be young people who are working their way up or in college or trying to find a way. For older people who are coming back to enjoy time with their family, or just looking for places to live with in the city that are affordable. And we have a number of accessory dwelling units illegally already in the city. So this and legal, yeah, some are grandfathered in, but this legislation just helps that process. In some of our more dense areas, like downtown and like the Eastport area, obviously we have to go back to the drawing board there and look at ways where we can say, okay, if you can't provide off-street parking for at least one car, then maybe you don't qualify for an accessory dwelling unit. These are obviously things that we'll talk about next week at the Planning Commission meeting on February the 6th as well, where we'll really get into the nuts and bolts of the legislation and just try to put together a good plan for housing. And is it okay for me to get into something?
Can we get your question? Because we are kind of a...
So I've heard a lot of issues, but I've not heard a whole lot of solutions. And you're not asking the people who are actually living on the system and want to get off the system. So I'm actually one of those people. So I don't look like I belong there. I look just like you and you and you. But the reality of it is my check, one of my checks, is the amount to pay my rent. The other check I'm living off of to pay for food, clothes for my children, electric. I can't even turn my heat on. I have 4 children. I am by no means necessary a statistic. I have a 21-year-old who is in college and a manager at a men's warehouse that's literally down the street. So I am fighting against the odds. What is missing is the fact that we're people. And in order to change the system, you need to embrace what the issues are. I can't get off of public housing or low-income housing or however you want to classify it if I don't have a way to work. No one's going to hire me if I don't have the education to apply for the job. I can't concentrate on working a 9 to 5 if I don't have dinner to fix. Or my son has holes in his shoes and he goes to a public high school. These are issues and no one is addressing it. I moved from Bywater. I called housing because we were infested with mice. I called your office. I lived there for over 6 years. The mice were so bad, they were running up and down the walls and across my children's feet. My case files sat on someone's desk. I am not a number. I also called Senator King's office, and I had no answer. What the issue is and what I need to be successful. What my children need to be successful and how you can help me. Instead, it goes on and on, year after year. Newsflash, Eastport was a mess 6 years ago. It's nothing new, it's new to now today because it's being brought to light. The reality of it is it's always been like that. We've always just looked aside because everybody else has went home to their grass and the windows that they look out of and they drive their cars and you fix dinner. It's not a problem because it's not your problem. It needs to be your problem.
Okay.
That's what the problem is. That's what the solution is, to actually put a name and a face and not a case number. To start with the person and embrace the person in their entirety. Daycare needs, social services, food, being able to receive a TCA check and still go to school. It is not an option. Why?
Investment. O'Berry Court has had investment. There's a number of other properties in Annapolis that are subsidized. Timothy House has had investment. A number of them that are very nice properties that have had investment. I understand that when you live there, that the pace is far too slow because the conditions are far too poor, too bad. We shouldn't ask anybody to live in the conditions that people live in Newtown 20, that's right. And that's just the fact. Right. So I understand it. But that is the challenge of the work. You have on one side people who think that we don't need it and we should divest and we should let the market take care of it. And then on the other side, people who are trying very hard to make sure that we invest. So please know that that work is being done as well. But I hear you and I understand. To the point of the wraparound services, making sure that we have sufficient investment in job opportunities, and not only job opportunities, but career opportunities, to make sure that you have the ability to take all of the passion and talent and advocacy and all the skills that you bring to bear and put them to work for your own benefit so that you can turn all of that into something that you can use to support your 4 children and your family in a way that brings meaning and dignity to the work that you do is something that we are investing in as well. So we understand that in Annapolis that the majority of people who work here, who can afford the life that the city of Annapolis is, that we all think is the standard of living in Annapolis, don't work in Annapolis because the jobs that are here are largely service industry jobs. We have a large industry that cares for the aging in Annapolis as well, but we have a lot of service industry jobs here. People commute out of this city to be able to afford to live in this city of Annapolis. So we have to do much more by way of attracting jobs that are those tech industry jobs, jobs that are those skilled profession jobs to the city of Annapolis if we want to be able to have talent like yourself be able to invest back in the city that you live in right now. So the planning for things like that, attracting those jobs and resources here is something that I know Stuart Ross, the planning that's being done right now, is working on, but it is obviously not happening fast enough. I don't want you to think that people who make these decisions have no perspective, because if I had time to share with you, I would tell you about when I lived in Bay Ridge Gardens and I lived in a building where Tony Strong Pratt lived in a building across the courtyard, and then how I was there and then I was able to finish my college degree. I was able to go to law school, all while living in Bay Ridge Gardens, which is one of our subsidized communities in Annapolis. I was only able to do that because I had incredible family support, but it was affordable housing and it was family support that was able to take me as a young single mother who had my son halfway through college all the way to the State House in Maryland. But those are opportunities that I want to make sure that I give back to other people, and that's why I make the sacrifice in the middle of the professional career to turn back around and meet people such as yourself who obviously have that talent and that passion to give those same things right back. So thank you so much.
I completely agree with Shanika in terms of all of that is extremely good, but you know, when you hear complaints like that, it's disheartening because, as you said, you feel like a number. And to me, I think that where that starts at is property management. And all of the things that you listed and all of the things that you just ran down the line about that you've had to deal with for years deals with how we manage our properties. And if we aren't holding the property management accountable, then it's the same thing is going to happen. And I'm just being honest. Like, I'm going to be real with you. You know, that's what we have to do. We have to step up and be and hold others accountable. We're just starting to get a little bit of transparency and all of this stuff with the hockey and trying to make waves and make stuff shake. But I mean, it's just not. Yes, we're working on it, but for us to be working on it for years while you have to live in that condition, it's not fair. And we have to keep fighting for it. I want you to know that we are actively fighting for it, and I hope that it doesn't continue at snail's pace, because that's not how government should be.
So, if you're asking me, can I empathize with your position? Do I feel it day to day? The honest answer is I can try to empathize, but I don't. What I do think we need to recognize is I feel we've been handed a Ponzi scheme. The job of the Housing Authority is insurmountable. I do not know how we overcome that, because we started behind the 8 ball. We started with a system that was underfunded to begin with, and we're cutting it back. How can we possibly expect it to be a success? So we really have to come up with a fundamental rethink, and that's why I made that plea earlier. City of Annapolis is not going to be able to help the Annapolis Housing Authority by itself. If somebody tells you we can, they're just lying to you. It's not true. So I think we need to do it collectively through all levels, and we have to do it earnestly. One of the reasons why the Forest Drive Task Force, besides the fact that it's working across the governmental organizations, is because we have some really smart, dedicated citizens, not politicians. I'm not on that task force. Rhonda Kendall Charles, the other person who co-sponsored it, we're not on it. It's citizens, and they're down in the trenches. Now that's up at planning. It's not at your level, but I think that the approach and how we can dig our way out of it has to happen when we all pull together, not try to, we'll solve this problem today and that problem tomorrow and that problem 20 years from now. So,
All right, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you again. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to AIA, Chesapeake, Action Network for pulling this together. Thanks all our panelists. Thank you very much.